Hey everybody, today we're going to be learning the intro section to Love is a Verb by John Mayer. But instead of learning just the rhythm part or just the lead part, we're going to actually learn how to play both of those parts at the same time. This is called a solo guitar arrangement in the classical world or a chord melody in the jazz world, but whatever you call it, it's a great way to learn more about your fretboard and to learn how to apply music theory in a practical way. We're going to do 3 versions, starting with a pretty easy version and then working our way up in difficulty from there. So we're in the key of E major here, and our chord progression is E, A, B, E. So that's a 1, 4, 5, 1 chord progression. And the only tricky thing about this chord progression is what's called the harmonic rhythm, which is just a fancy term for when exactly we're changing chords. If you notice, I'll play it in a second with counting, and notice how I'm changing chords approximately every 2 beats, but not exactly every 2 beats. So here's the chord progression with counting. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So it's not exactly every 2 beats, right? It's not 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I'm actually changing on the and of 2 instead of the 3. So every other chord is what we sometimes call a push, which is when you change chords an 1/8 note or so earlier than you would expect to. So the easy way to remember all this is just that we're changing chords on the 1 and the and of 2. That's it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, so for our beginner version, our easy version, we're just going to be playing the root notes of the chords and a slightly simplified melody. And we're going to need to start with the melody because that's going to dictate where we will be on the fretboard, and then we'll be able to choose where we want to play the root notes in conjunction with that melody. So let me just play you the melody and then I'll explain what's going on. So there's our melody, and we have this note up here, which we can't play, actually this note too, we can't play either one of these notes on the high E string any lower on the fretboard. So we have to be up here. We can't play this melody down here unless we move the whole thing down an octave, and then we're going to be too low. It's just not going to work. So in order to make this melody work, we're going to have to play it up here in the kind of the middle part of the fretboard. And then once we finish talking about the melody, then we'll be able to figure out where to incorporate the root notes with that melody to put everything together. But first, let's map out what's going on with this melody. So I'm going to give you just the kind of tab version first. So we're starting on the 9th fret of the B string, 7th fret of the high E, back to the 9th fret of the B string, up to the 9th fret of the high E. We're jumping down to the 6th fret of the G, 9th fret, back down to the 6th, and then back up to our starting point, 9 on the B, and then 9, 7, 9 on the G string, 6, back up to the B string, 9, 7, and then ending on the 9th fret of the G string. So that's a tab version, but to really understand what we're doing, we need to relate this to a scale pattern, right? If we want to understand musically what we're doing rather than just memorizing what seems like a random sequence of numbers and strings, we're going to need to relate it back to a scale pattern. And I mentioned that the song is in the key of E, right? So we need to find an E major scale that encompasses all these notes that we're using for the melody. So here's an E. So we're going to use what's called a second finger pattern on this, starting on this A string, 7th fret. So that takes care of these 2 notes from our melody, but we still have these 4 that we haven't covered yet. So we're going to need to go for another octave of the scale starting on our higher E here. So we're going to use what's called a fourth finger pattern here. And now we take care of all of those notes in the melody with that 2-octave scale pattern. So the last step we need to do is we need to talk about the scale degrees that we're using in the melody, and that's really going to allow us to understand what we're doing musically. And by scale degrees, I just mean we're numbering the notes in the scales in order to give them a name. Each note has a name. On top of the letter name, if we want to relate it to the key, we use scale degrees. So here's what I mean. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. This is 1 because this is just another higher octave of E. So we're starting over at 1 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Those are all the scale degrees. So if we walk through the melody now and use the scale degree names, this is going to give us a lot more information about why this melody works in the key and why it works with the chords that it's paired with. So we start up here on scale degree 3, right? 3 of the higher octave. 1, 2, 3, 3, 5, 3, 6, and then a jump down an octave. 6. There's an octave shape right there. 6, 1, 6, 3, 3, 2, 1, 6, 3, 2, 1. And by the way, if you found that scale stuff kind of confusing, or if you kind of understood it but you'd like to learn more, check out my website, newversemethod.com. I'll link that in the description. I am currently working on a full course, a series of lessons called Fretboard Fundamentals that will teach you everything you need to know about scale patterns and scale degrees and just how to fundamentally understand the layout of the fretboard. All right, now that we have our melody mapped out, we can go about adding the root notes of our chords, and that'll give us our easy beginner version of this solo arrangement. So if you remember, our chords are E, A, B, E. Well, first we need to figure out where we're going to play those root notes because our left hand is now up here playing the melody, and we might have to move some of those. Well, E and A, luckily for us, are just open strings, right? E, A, doesn't matter where our left hand is for those chords because we can still just use those open strings as our root notes. But B is not an open string, of course. We're playing B on the 2nd fret of the A string, and that means that we are going to have to move this note somewhere closer to where our hand is going to be up here playing the melody. And the easiest way to do that, if you don't just automatically know where a B is up here, is to use the rule that if you go down 1 string and up 5 frets, that'll give you the same note. And that's always going to be true unless you're working with the G and B strings, then it's 4 frets. So if we start here, fret number 2 on the A string, jump down to the low E and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frets up, that gives us a B. So that's where we're going to play our B as we're playing the melody. So we got E, A, B, E. There's our root note cycle that we're going to cycle through as we're playing the melody. The next thing we need to figure out is the rhythm of the melody so that we know when to change from one root note to the next. And that is going to look like this. I'm going to now count through the melody, but this time I'm not going to be counting scale degrees. I'm going to be counting the beats, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So if you remember, we're changing chords on the 1 count and the and of 2. So now if we plug that in, this is what it's going to look like. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and here's the B. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Start over at the E. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. For the intermediate version, or the kind of medium level difficulty, we're going to be adding a note to each root note so that we get more of a chord feel rather than just a root note feel. We're going to keep the semi-simplified version of the melody, but that extra note that's being added to each root note is really going to go a long way to filling things out and making it sound a lot better. So there's a couple of different ways you can go about that. We can search for an extra note to add by just looking for note names. So for example, the E chord consists of the notes E, G sharp, and B. So we can look for an E, a G sharp, or a B around here where our hand is going to be and go chord by chord doing that. But I think it's actually going to be a lot easier if we think in terms of caged shapes. And if you don't understand how the cage system works, I have a video explaining that. Check that out. I'll link to that up here. If we look for different cage shapes, it's going to allow us to kind of turn our brain off in terms of even thinking about what note name we're using, and really just pick whichever note out of whatever chord, whatever cage shape we can find that sounds the best. So let's go through E. This will make a lot more sense once you see me walk through it with one chord. So for our E chord, the closest caged shape to where we're playing our melody is probably going to be that guy, which is the A major shape, right? A major chord just moved up to an E. So we can pick one of these notes to add to our low open E, and that's going to fill things out. We're playing that in the melody, and the basic rule is that you usually don't want to add a note that's higher than your melody note. Otherwise, that note can often sound like it's the melody note. It kind of takes over. So we want to keep our note lower than that, so on a lower string than the B string, and that just leaves those three notes. Well, what if we add this guy? That sounds fine, but this is actually just another octave of E, and it doesn't really add a whole lot to the chord, in my opinion. This doesn't sound all that much fuller than just. There's a little bit more going on, but I would rather choose a different note that's not E, because that's going to fill things out a little bit more. So how about this guy? That sounds pretty good. That is a B, and that gives us kind of a power chord type of sound, because this is the fifth of the chord. Or we can add this guy. That sounds better than this too, but again, this is just an octave higher of E. So while that sounds good, I'm gonna go for this one, because I think this one fills things out the best, because that gives us a B rather than just another E. But as you're doing this, feel free to choose any of the ones that you like the sound of the best. This is your arrangement. So I like the sound of the B. If you like the sound of either one of these E's, go for it. But for me, this is what I have for the E. And that's great because our melody note is a G sharp. So that means we have E, B, G sharp. Those are all the three notes in the E major chord. So I have a full E major triad here. Next, let's look at the A chord. So our melody note is here, and of course, our bass note is here. So we want to find an A caged shape around here that we can take from. And that is probably gonna be this guy, the D major shape, right? This is a D major shape moved up to an A. And melody note being on the high E string, that gives us those three notes to choose from. Well, it's kind of the same predicament that we saw with the E chord. If we add this guy, that's just the next higher octave of A. It's going to give us a similar kind of, to me, underwhelming addition to just the root note and the melody note. fills it out a little bit, but it doesn't add all that much. And then same with this. This is the next higher octave of A. So that's going to sound a little bit better because you have more separation between the two A's, but still I'm going to go for the note that is not already being played, and that is this guy, the E, which is again the fifth of the chord. And just like with the E chord, that gives us a full triad because our melody note is C sharp. And those are the three notes in an A chord, A, C sharp, and E. So we have that for the A. So we put those two together. There we go, sounding better already. Now let's look at the B chord. This one is going to be tricky because we're fretting the root note, and that just automatically makes things harder because you have fewer fingers available to add that extra note with. So our melody note's here, and our root note is here. Now, if we're looking for a cage shape, I mean, probably right there. That's probably going to be the best option. We also have this G shape, but where our hand is more oriented toward this one, toward the E shape. So let's see. Again, following the rule that we want to keep the extra note lower than our melody note, that only leaves two notes available for us to choose, right? We have this guy, or we have this guy. So let's try them both. If we add this one, we get this sound. Not bad, it fills things out a bit. Or this guy. That one to my ears doesn't really work that well because, again, we have that octave problem, right? It's just an octave higher than the note that we're already playing for the bass, and so it doesn't add that much. But also, this note, remember, this is scale degree 6. B is the 5 chord, so that means it's built on scale degree 5. That's the scale degree that I'm playing in the bass for the root note. So I'm playing scale degree 5 in the bass and scale degree 6 in the melody. Those notes are really close together. And if I add an octave higher of the root note, scale degree 5 up here, now I have this. And that can work, that's not terrible, but compared to the other two chords that we just worked out, those notes are a little bit clashy to my ears. They don't sound all that nice. So I would probably choose this guy. Okay, so let's say we choose this guy. We run into a problem here though, because what's our next melody note? That. All right, how are we gonna play that note? This is what I was talking about. You run out of fingers more easily when you're having to fret the bass note. Well, we could do something crazy, like use our third finger for this additional note. I mean, if you want to do that, you can. I prefer not to because I really just, that's awkward, and I know that's gonna be the spot that I mess up over and over again. If I'm going to this chord and I have to land that, and then I have to hit that melody note, I don't want to do that. I want to play something easier. So here's where our fretboard knowledge comes in handy. I'm going to propose that we completely move the location of this B chord somewhere different and see if there's a better option somewhere else. Because if you move it to a different part of the fretboard, you get different cage shapes available, and sometimes things open up that you don't have available to you in your initial spot. So let's use that trick, that 5 fret trick that we used to find this root note in the first place, and except for this time we're gonna go the opposite direction, right? Before we went down 1 string and up 5 frets. I can't go down 1 string, and I can't really reach up 5 frets even if I did have another lower string. So we're gonna do the opposite. Up 1 string, down 5 frets, and look at where that puts us, right back where we started from. So let's see if there's a better option down here. Well, first we need to figure out where our melody notes are going to be down here. We figured them out up here, so we need to move these guys down here. Now, we could do that 5 fret thing for every single note. That, there's not that many notes being played during this B chord, but I prefer to go back to rest on our scale knowledge, go back to the scale degree stuff, and this is where that stuff comes in really handy. If we can find another E major scale, then we can just plug in the right scale degrees. So let me remind you, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then followed by a 1. So 6, 1, and then back to 6, and then for the next note, we're to the next chord. So just those three notes, 6, 1, 6. Those are the notes that we need to be able to play as we're playing our B chord. So let's find an E major scale. Well, here's an E. So we could use another second finger pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. So where are the 6 and the 1? Those are the notes we're looking for, right? 6, 1. So we could do, that's doable. We have to bar, but it's doable. We can make this easier though. If you notice, this note is on the 5th fret of the B string. The 5th fret is a note, that's a number you always want to look out for, because when you're doing solo arrangements, often if you can work in open strings, that's going to make your life easier. We're already seeing that it was much easier when we had open strings for our bass notes for the first two chords than it is so far for our non-open string bass note. And it's the same for melody notes. If you're playing a melody and you can work in an open string, that's going to free up fingers. It's generally going to make things a lot easier to play. So if we have a note on the 5th fret, most of the time, unless we're on the 5th fret of the G string, we can just move that note to the next higher open string, and boom, that makes our lives so much easier. So now instead of having to do this bar, we can do open E string, right? That's so much easier. So that's our melody fragment for the B chord. And now we can go through that whole process of looking for another note to add to this B chord. So looking for the cage shape, that's probably going to be the A shape again, right? The only other option would be the C shape, but we're too low on the fretboard to do that because we need to be at least on the 3rd fret to make the C shape work. So let's look at our options. We have our melody note on the B string, we have our bass note on the A string, so that leaves these two notes, right? The D string and the G string notes as available kind of padding to pad out this chord. Well, we got that note. That's actually the same note as we were saying would work up here. So that's an option for sure. It's a little bit easier to play down here. It's still not super easy to play, but in my opinion, it's a little bit more playable than up here. Other option is that guy, which is an octave of the root note. Again, I don't like the way that sounds for the same reasons I outlined up here. So really the only viable option I see for this caged shape is this guy. But, there's always a but, right? We're taking a long journey from where we started, but it's going to pay off because this is a 5 chord. 5 chords are often played as 7th chords, meaning there's another note added to the chord, and you don't just have a root, a 3rd, and a 5th. You have a root, a 3rd, a 5th, and a 7th. And in this song, in the intro of this song that we're doing, I'm not hearing a 7th in there, but we can take some creative liberties because we're doing our own arrangement anyway, right? You don't have to stick 100% to the song. It's impossible to stick 100% to the song because we're already changing it just by the nature of doing a solo arrangement. Arrangement means you take the spirit of the song and the bones of it, and you figure out a way to do your own thing with it. So I'm going to say we can try playing a 7th of this chord. So instead of using the A major cage shape, if we use the A7 cage shape, which would just be this, we're adding this note. So instead of playing the octave of the root note here, we're moving it down a whole step, and that gives us a seventh. What would it sound like if we added that note? To my ears, that's the best option. I really like the way that sounds. So we have this, we have this, or we have this. I really like the way this sounds, so I'm going to go with this. But again, this is your arrangement, so you can go with any of those options you want, or you can keep it up here if you want. It's up to you. But this is my choice. So far, plug in all three of those chords. We have and now down here. I like that. And now we just have one more to go in this first half of the chord progression, or the first cycle through the chord progression, which is going back to the E, and we need to move our melody fragment down again, right? So before it was, there's just one note played on this last E on this fourth chord, and that is scale degree 3, right? 1, 2, 3. So let's figure that out. If our scale degree 1 is, this is where we originally found it, this is where we moved it to, either way, we count up from there, 1 whole step up for scale degree 2 and another whole step up for scale degree 3. This is our scale degree 3. Now, we don't necessarily have to move our melody note down here. We can jump back up here if we want. And then, you know, use the same note that we added to the first E. That works. But it's a bit of a big jump. It doesn't bother me as much going down to the B7 because we have a longer time, right? We're on that A for a while. Oops, sorry. And we have plenty of time, but on this one, we just have an eighth note because that last melody note ends right before we have to hit the next melody note. So it's going to be a bit more frantic getting up here if we want to do that. So I'm going to use this lower fret to play our melody note instead of this guy up here. So we got our bass note, we got our new location of our melody note for this fourth chord, and now we just need to look for a caged shape. Well, we're pretty close to this open position, meaning we could use that E major shape. The only other shape we could find down here for the cage system would be this D major. So we could, let's cycle through our options for the using the open E shape. Well, we got this guy. That works. It's a bit awkward. I mean, it's not that bad, really. It's maybe slightly awkward for our right hand too. But that's not bad. And that's a B, just like this, but an octave lower, so that keeps things kind of consistent. Our next octave is this, or our next option is this, which is an octave of the root note. So again, you know my feelings about that. I'm just going to disqualify that right off the bat. Then we have this note, right? That's our next note. That one is an octave lower than our melody note. So for the same reasons that I don't really like to use octaves of the root note, I don't really like to use octaves of the melody note either. It depends on the sound you're going for. Like, that totally works, and if you like the sound of that, go for it. It does kind of reinforce the melody in a cool way, but to my ears, I would really prefer to add the note that's missing from the triad, right? We have an E, we have a G sharp, and we're missing a B. So if I can find a B in here, that's going to be the option that I go for. And well, lo and behold, my melody note's up here on the high E string. I'm not using the B string anymore, and that means I can use the open B string, which is of course a B, I think that's the option I'm going to go with because I just like that sound of having all 3 notes from the triad. So that completes the first half of the intro. We have so far I like that. And now that we have our first half mapped out, that's gonna possibly be very helpful for our second half. We might be able to just recycle all those shapes and the second half will be a lot easier to figure out. So let's see what happens. So we ended our first half right there. The second half starts with another E, right? E, A, B, E as our chord progression. And our melody is, those are the 3 notes that we play under this, this next E chord. So if we wanted to, we could, this was the shape that we were using for the first E, we could, that totally works, but really we're ending here. Our melody notes are 3, 2, 1 in terms of scale degrees. We're ending on a 3 here. So 3, 2, 1. We might as well just stay down here, right? This is so much easier if we're already here. We could do that, but why not just stay here? And we can use the same B, it's the same chord, right? There's 2 E's in a row. So we're ending here, and then again. That's what I'm gonna go with because that feels a lot easier to me. And that means maybe we're not going to recycle these shapes. Maybe we're going to move everything down here. We're already down here in the easier part of the fretboard. Let's see if we can stay down here. And that's going to mean moving our melody down there, of course, as well, right? So we already figured out 3, 2, 1 down here looks like 3, 2, 1. Our next melody note is that. You remember what scale degree that was? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So where is a 6 here? Here's our E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this is the note that we used for our B chord, right? So we already know this. That's a 6. So we got 3, 2, 1, and now we're playing A in the bass, 6. Beautiful. This is an A chord. We don't even need to be thinking about cage system at this point. Just play an A major chord, however you happen to play your A major. I play it like this. So that's going to be either the 2nd fret of the D string or the 2nd fret of the G string for our extra note that we're going to add. If you know what notes those are, you probably already know which note I'm going to choose. This guy is just another A. Sounds fine, sounds good, but I'm going to go with this guy because this is an E. That gives us A, E, and C sharp, and that's a full triad. So there's my A chord. So far we have E, A, and now for the last B, we have that scale degree 3. So up here it was 3, 2, 1. That's the last segment of our melody, and for the B chord it's just 3 and 2, and then we hit that last note during our last E. So 3 and 2. Well, we already figured out 3 and 2 down here are right there. So here's our B, and we can go through the whole process that we went through for the previous B, looking at the cage shape. We have this. Sounds good. We have the octave of the B, which I'm not very partial to. It doesn't add much. Or, because our melody note is on the high E string, we can use the B string for our extra note too. That's the 3rd of the chord. But for some reason, that note just doesn't really sound like it works that well. And we'll actually get to why that reason is, what that reason is next in the next segment, but that doesn't sound that good to my ears. So I would say out of those options, that guy, that's the one that I would use. But, oh yeah, we have this other option that we settled on last time, the 7th. Let's see what that sounds like. I kind of like that sound. To some people's ears, that might sound a little bit dissonant because you have scale degree 7. Well, sorry, not scale degree 7, the 7th of the chord, which is scale degree 4. You don't really need to think about that, but you have the 7th of the chord up here, and then you have the 6th of the chord up here. So we have those two notes, which are, depending on your interpretation of that, that's either a nice kind of cool tension or that just sounds bad. So again, use your ears, choose the note that you like the sound of. This, using this note down here, the 5th of the chord, that's a lot kind of more consonant, which is the opposite of dissonant, a lot just prettier sound, kind of safer sound. But the 7th, I kind of like the 7th, so I'm going to go with that. So here is 3, 2. So I'm barring it now because I have to play this scale degree 2 in the melody. And that just leaves that very last melody note, which was that, which is a scale degree 1. That's an E. And we know that our E is here on the open E string. 3, 2, 1, right? So going back to our E options, we're just using this open E chord. We can cycle through all these notes, but let's be a little bit more efficient. Now that we kind of know how this works, I already know I'm not going to want to choose another octave of E, because especially right here, because I have an E in my bass, I also am ending on an E in the melody. So I have 2 octaves of E already. I'm not going to just add a 3rd octave of E and call that good. That doesn't add anything to the sound. So I'm going to either use the 5th of the chord, which is a B, or the 3rd of the chord, which is a G sharp. So here's a B. Yeah, that works. That would be... There's something I don't really like about that, and part of it is because this is the root note of my previous chord. So if I'm going... It doesn't... I need more change. I need it to feel like I'm changing a little bit more. So I'm not going to use that guy. This is an E, so I'm not going to use that. There's a G sharp. That's nice. I really like that. And that 7th that I'm using for the B chord, it's this nice half-step resolution down to the 3rd of the E chord. So that's a cool option. The other option would be that B. That B is probably going to work a little bit better than this low B. Let's hear what it sounds like. Yeah, that's cool too. I would say either one of those last 2 options would be great. G sharp or B, whichever you like the sound of. Of course, you're not limited to just one note. Like especially we're on an open chord. You can play both of those guys, and that gives you a 4-note chord: E, G sharp, B, and E. That gives you the full triad. So if you want to do that, go for that. All right, so for the hardest version, the advanced version, we're going to put all the stuff that we took out of the melody to simplify it back in. So we're no longer working with a simplified melody. We're putting back in all the decorations that we took out. We already had all the basic notes, so we're not adding any more notes per se, but we're adding some more decorations, and that just means hammer-ons, pull-offs, and slides. So it's going to sound like this. I'll play it for you once and then I'll walk you through it. a lot more little twinkles and stuff like that in there, right? So let's walk through that. We start out with a grace note hammer-on from scale degree 2 to 3. And a grace note is just, you play a note and then you immediately move to your target note. So in this case, our target note is scale degree 3, and we're playing scale degree 2, and then immediately hammering on scale degree 3. And then a grace note slide from 5 to 6. Then we're moving down here just like last time. Grace note hammer on from 5 to 6. Grace note slide from 2 to 3. This time we're moving back up here, and you'll see why when we add the chords. Another grace note hammer on from 2 to 3. Followed by a grace note pull off back to 2. So that's slide from 5 to 6. And then we're back down here where we finished the last one. Grace note hammer on from 2 to 3. And then we do this combination of a hammer on and a pull off. This is called a mordant. We start on our target note, but then we immediately hammer on up to scale degree 3, and then immediately pull off back down to scale degree 2. That's real twinkly right there. And then our last note. All right, everybody, say hi to Dongle. Now for the chords, we are gonna add some arpeggiation on the kind of the empty spaces on every other chord. So if you notice the way this chord progression works, because we're changing on the and of 2 every time, we're changing a little early. On those chords, we tend to have more space that where we're just letting the note ring until we move to the next chord. And so on those, in that space, on each one of those and of 2 chords, we're gonna add some arpeggiation to fill that space and just kind of make it sound fuller. So let's walk through this. We have our first chord, pretty much the same as we had it in the intermediate version, except for with the hammer-on in the melody. But now for this A, we're doing that, or something like that. And the rhythm of these arpeggiations is totally up to you. Feel free to do whatever you want rhythmically with this arpeggiation stuff. I'm gonna give you the shapes that I'm using, but go as crazy as you want with the rhythm, and even change the shapes if you want. But what I'm doing here is something like that. I'm using the C major caged shape, but obviously not using that guy because that's my root note. So I'm just using these 3 notes on the D, G, and B strings for the arpeggiation. And there's my melody note. And so that makes the slide into that chord kind of tricky because you have to do this pre-bar of the highest 3 strings if you want to get that G string note in there in the arpeggiation. You could do this. That just means your melody note's going to cut off as soon as you lift it and move your finger to the G string. If that's okay with you, that's fine. But I kind of like the sound of the melody note sailing through that whole measure. All right, so there's my A. Now we're down here for the B7. Oh, and by the way, the B chord, I mentioned in the previous segment that I would talk about why that third of the chord didn't sound right to my ears. I wanted to save that for this advanced version just because I figured if you're already doing the advanced version, you might be interested in understand this a little bit more. I didn't want to muddy the waters with the previous versions. But I actually think the chord that he's playing in the recording of this song is a B sus rather than a B major. And that's why that third didn't sound quite right. That sounds more like it is then. So anyway, that's an aside. So back to the arrangement here. We got, so that's the same as it was in the intermediate, except for we have that hammer on. So right here for this E chord, we're doing the exact same move that we're doing for our A chord, just move down to an E. So we're using this C major caged shape, but aligning it with an E, of course. And we're doing that same pre-bar as we slide. And then, of course, arpeggiate that however you want. And now for this, for the beginning of the second half, I'm doing the melody up here because I'm adding this high note. This is kind of like a Hendrixy type of move. And that breaks a rule, of course, that I mentioned at the very beginning of the lesson, where you don't want to add a note that's higher than the melody, because that can sometimes step on the melody and make it sound like the higher note is a melody. In this case, I think because you have so much movement in the melody, that movement draws attention to that melody note and makes it a little more clear that it is the melody rather than your new higher note. So I moved it up here because, of course, if I do it down here where we had it in the intermediate version, I can't play this high harmony note. So, and that's from our A major shape. Now I'm sliding into this scale degree 6 here because, well, I'm sliding into it because I think the slide sounds cool, but I'm sliding into it with my third finger because I'm turning this A chord into an A major 7 chord. It's because I think it sounds cool. I don't think that's what he plays in the actual recording, but I just like the sound of it. I think it sounds cool. I'm taking some creative license because you can do that when you're doing a solo arrangement. If you don't like the sound of that, feel free to move this G sharp up to an A. So this is based on the E major caged shape and just the top three strings of it. There's my bass note. So I'm taking this top half of the E major caged shape and moving this high octave of the root note down a half step, which gives me a major 7. So that sounds like, arpeggiate that however you want. You can add some of that A in there, back and forth between the G sharp and the A if you want. Get as fancy as you want. And then we're back down here with the B7. Same as the intermediate version, except for with our little twinkly stuff. And then I'm playing all 4 notes here because why not? And then if you want to just leave this without adding any padding, and that kind of is your last chord, that works. If you're going to loop it and just continue to go back to the beginning and play it again, it can sound cool to add some padding to this too, some arpeggiation. So that might be something like oof. Whatever you want to do, but you're going to use this. I'm using my second finger, by the way, which is why I kind of messed it up in the first attempt, because typically I play this chord like this. Sometimes I play it like that, but not that often. But I'm using my second finger right there because I find it a lot easier to get to that E using my second finger cleanly than if I was to pick up the bar, because what happens when I pick up the bar is this. Right? You're barring all these strings, and then you pick up your finger and you get all that residual open string ringing, and I don't want that. So it's a lot easier for me to get that chord change to sound clean if I use my second finger, which then puts me at a slightly less familiar position to pad out to play the arpeggio of this E chord. But there you go. Like I said, there's a lot of creative license going on here, and I'm not even giving you this is exactly how I do it, because I kind of like to change it up too. So mess around with those arpeggiations, and if you want, feel free to even mess around with the voicings. Like, for example, especially this A major 7, that's a total judgment call. If you don't like this, the way that 7th sounds in there, keep it as an A major. Or add other notes to some of the voicings. You can go as crazy as you want, but really the thing that you are gonna be able to play with without putting too much effort into like discovering new things to do with your left hand is of course the arpeggiation, the rhythm of the arpeggiation with your right hand. And that's it for Love is a Verb. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I really love doing these arrangement videos, so if you have a song that you'd like to see me do a video like this for, please leave it in the comments. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I can't play guitar with you on my lap, dude. You're too big.